Tor here from Pro Stock Tips, and today I'm really excited to be talking about one of my favorite stocks that I plan to be a long-term investor and make returns in excess of 20-fold. So that stock is Havilah Resources, which is a major copper mine developer in South Australia, which is a tier 1 jurisdiction. Now, their deposit, the Kalkaroo copper project, is a tier 1 copper deposit with 1 million tons of resource, of copper resource, and 3 million ounces of gold across their copper projects. So this is a very substantial resource. Now, if we take a look at the Kalkaroo feasibility study, we can see that, they, at the current gold and copper price, that their project comes in at about a $2 billion net present value. And this is not even considering the extensions to the pit outline, which would obviously incorporate significantly more, a significantly larger portion of that resource, at the current, if we were to take the current copper price and current gold price. So there's certainly a lot of upside to that NPV value. So I believe this project is worth in excess of $2 billion, to be honest. And I believe that copper prices are going to continue to rise, especially in 2024, 2025, when we can see the market starting to enter a large deficit in copper, which I will explain later. Now, this is certainly a project where I see a lot of upside, as the current market capitalization is around $55 million. So if we're talking about, a $2 billion project compared to a $55 million market cap, then we can see a substantial upside, if they do bring this into production, which I believe they will do, because I believe that the environmental considerations are quite favourable. So I believe South Australia, the government will, or the mining department will permit this project. So I expect that this year we could see the approvals, the environmental approvals and mining leases, etc., for this project come in. So the project would then be substantially de-risked, and they plan for an FID, so a final investment decision, in 2022. So that would mean that the project goes ahead and they can start building this mine. Obviously, that also depends on funding. However, I believe that they will be able to finance this project, simply because we can see, even at the lowest copper prices, the project still has substantial present value and substantial upside returns. So it's a very economically viable copper mine. And we can get into that later, why it is so economically rewarding. Now, so therefore, I do believe, after we see that the government approvals come in for the mining, that we can see the funding approvals. So that's certainly very promising. They are in discussion with potential financiers for the mine, and I believe that they can bring this into production quite quickly, because they're planning on developing a small starter pit with an 80 to 90,000 ounces of gold per annum production and 5,000 tons of native copper. So that's a very a good start, because they potentially need a lot less capital expenditure, so they don't need to raise anywhere near as much money to get this starter pit happening, which obviously then leads to the full-scale production, of the pit, of the project in whole. So certainly, this is an extremely favorable copper project, and I believe that there is enormous upside to the stock for those reasons, particularly in 2022. Now, keep an eye out for key developments like potential funding, submission of the PEPR, so that's essentially their environmental report, that sort of thing, to the South Australian government for approval to mine and the granting. So we don't know the time frame for the granting of the mining approvals and environmental approvals. However, when they do come in, that's when we could certainly see a lot of upside to the share price. We saw with Uranium Minerals when they were fully permitted, that the share price essentially doubled. So certainly approvals substantially de-risk this stock, and also the big one would be funding, project funding. If they do get the finance, we can certainly see upside to the stock. And these upsides can be enormous, as I've mentioned. And another key consideration is Havilah plans to spin out their uranium assets via the New Energy IPO, in which they indicate that they plan to perform an in-specie distribution to distribute shares for New Energy to Havilah shareholders. Now, this is also a key event and catalyst for the stock, as investors may want to get their hands on the stock before the in-specie distribution. I know I certainly want to add to my position because I believe that the share price will rise on that announcement of the in-specie distribution before the record date. And also I plan on receiving those shares and then potentially selling them when they hit the market, because I believe that they'll be quite hot. It could be quite a hot IPO. We know that uranium has really taken off recently. There's a lot of hype factor about it. We know there's the potential for the prices to skyrocket in the uranium market with the SPUT vehicle. So the SPUT Physical Uranium Trust buying up a lot of, millions of ounces of uranium, millions of pounds, I should say, of uranium off the spot market. Now, when they list on the potentially the New York Stock Exchange, so they are applying for a major US listing. At this stage, we don't know if that will go ahead, but they're certainly obligated to apply, and it seems likely that they will eventually achieve their listing on a major US exchange, which could essentially allow enormous amounts of capital to be poured into the fund to take enormous amounts of uranium off the spot market, driving the prices of uranium up enormously. That's the expectations, not just from me, but basically the whole community of uranium investors are anticipating this key market event to drive price realization in the uranium market. Now, with such hype around uranium and potential for enormous price spike, in uranium, or even just the hype factor alone, could result in New Energy achieving a very substantial valuation upon completion of its IPO. So when it hits the market, we could see a significant pop potentially. If that's the case, I might be planning to offload the shares at that stage and then reinvest them straight back into Havilah, because ultimately I'm not too concerned about the New Energy shares. I might potentially hold them if I believe that they're going to have some exploration success. Now, they are certainly next to Boss Energy's Honeymoon project, which is a very substantial uranium mine restart in South Australia, which should be low cost as it's using in situ recovery. So it certainly has a lot of favourable factors going for it, and that's why I believe that the New Energy IPO could be hot. So, but ultimately, my key focus is the copper and gold project, which I believe is a much more certain go ahead, and I believe that's where the enormous upside potential is, and that's where I believe that there's enormous, it's a great long-term investment in the copper space, in anticipation of that copper supply deficit that I talked about. And I certainly think that that's where I want to take those profits from the New Energy spin out and put them back into Havilah and make even more of a substantial return. So it's a very exciting prospect. Now, they also have the list goes on. They also have a iron ore project. So in this grant space, and look at this, there's huge potential. They've estimated, 3.5 billion tons. That puts them in the same category or same sort of resource profile as magnetite mines. So essentially, this is a really good deposit because it's basically starting at surface and just a continuous deposit of magnetite with reasonable grades for magnetite, and in a great location. They could certainly see the development of this iron ore resource. It could result in huge upsides, potentially just as substantial as the copper project. So it's very exciting. Now they're planning to do a drill program this year. So, as we see these drill results come through and then potentially define this $3.5 billion ton resource, of magnetite, which would obviously produce a high grade concentrate. We could see huge upside to the share price from that as well. So there's so many catalysts here that could drive up the share price. Also cobalt, so they have their cobalt project. If they continue to work on that, we could see a lot of upside due to a lot of hype factor going to cobalt due to the increased demand by lithium-ion batteries. That's an interesting one, cobalt, because there are certainly some considerations to take into account as high nickel chemistries are anticipated to dominate, but certainly there still seems to be a lot of projections for sustained higher cobalt prices. So very interesting stuff there with the cobalt project. So it's just an all-rounder. Now another crucial consideration to the upside of this project, the Kalkaroo copper project, is that they have bastnäsite. So they have rare earth minerals occurring within this deposit. Now at this stage it's a bit too early to speculate. However, they are doing some research on this, and its potential they could economically extract heavy rare earth minerals from the Kalkaroo project. It's a bit uncertain at this stage what value that's going to add. However, it certainly could potentially result in significant value, as the prices of rare earth minerals, especially heavy rare earth minerals, which is found in the bastnäsite, could be worth an absolute fortune. So potentially there's a very significant, potentially the rare earth content could be very significant.